is going to speak to us on LSMS. I'll just pop this in here.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Sebi. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks for inviting us. So I'm going to talk about livestock in the household economy, what survey data can tell us, in particular focusing on LSMS data. I'm Harriet Mugera. I'm an economist in the LSMS team, which is part of the development data group of the World Bank. So just for those who maybe don't know what the LSMS is or what the LSMS does, I'll just briefly go through a couple of basic slides. The LSMS stands for the Living Standards Measurement Study, which is a household survey program that focused on generating high quality data, improving survey methods, and building capacity. So these are the three main areas that we focus on. The goal of the LSMS is to facilitate the use of household survey data for evidence-based policy. So it's demand-driven. So we produce high-quality, multi-topic national and sub-national representative data that allows for a rich understanding of poverty. We also provide technical assistance to national statistical offices around the world, build their capacity through training activities, and also facilitate the transfer of knowledge from our team to the national statistics, to the local teams. So we conduct cutting-edge research on best practices in survey methods and the latest technology. So of course, our research is also based on feedback we get on people who are using the LSMS data. And then we publish rigorous analytical work on a wide range of topics linked to poverty and livelihoods in low-income countries. And we document and publicly release open access data. So the data we collect is publicly available, and anyone can access it. So how does the LSMS team work? We establish collaborations with country, national statistical offices and other stakeholders on producing the LSMS type data set as part of their national survey plan. So we make sure there's this engaging with stakeholders, and it has to be something that also comes from them, not just imposed by us. So we set up data user groups to learn country needs and then generate the demand for the data. We also incorporate the latest expertise on best practices in survey methods and provide technical assistance on all aspects of survey design and implementation, from questionnaire design to fieldwork to survey software solutions, and as well as building capacity with local counterparts. So we also conduct parallel trainings once we are in the local context. So then we also collaborate to document and rapidly disseminate the final data sets. One of our latest publications on livestock is a collaboration with FAO, but as well as the Uganda National Bureau of Statistics and the Tanzania National Bureau of Statistics, where we together prepared some of the guidelines on how to collect and to use the livestock data within a survey setting. So the LSMS surveys focus on welfare. So there's monetary, non-monetary measurement. So consumption, multipurpose, and income. We also allow for people to conduct the kind of data we collect, allows for distributional analysis. The surveys are multi-purpose, so they go beyond measurement. So they're also tools for behavior, understanding phenomena, and also analyzing linkages, for example, between livestock and other sectors. They're multi-level, so we have community, household, individual plot data, and they can also be gender disaggregated. They're geo-referenced, so we create geo variables to avoid this. Of course, there's a component of the dissemination component is limited because of confidentiality issues. And then we are moving to computer-assisted data sets. So the LSMS surveys are slowly transiting, and we are using a World Bank software. It's called Service Solutions, which is on a CAPI platform. And it's free. There's also free access to the server. So, but I don't think if anyone is interested on this, I'm happy to give you more information. And then the open access. So the microdata is normally available on the web within 12 months, and now with CAPI, we're able to even reduce the time to which data can be accessed from when it is collected. It's now, I think, it's been halved. For Malawi, we're able to get it out in 6 months. So an overview of some of the LSMS ISA supported surveys. So for most, these are the countries we've been collecting data. And as you can see, for most countries, and as Hannah mentioned, for example, for Tanzania, we're actually preparing for the 5th wave. I'll be in Tanzania in January for the extended panel to prepare for wave 5. And so we have Ethiopia, Malawi, and then we have both the integrated household survey as well as the panel survey. So these are surveys that have what we call an integrated survey on agriculture. So this is where we find important components of also livestock data collection. So there's Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda. So there are more plus 100 LSMS surveys. You can download them on our microdata library. And then we also have a lot of documentation as well as guidelines and output information you can find on our website. So just an overview of how the survey instrument looks like. So we have the household and individual component, which is normally the first part where we have all household related related survey components such as expenditure, education, health, labor, and then we have the agricultural component, plot details, inputs, crops, and then livestock, fisheries, forestry, among other components. And then we have the community questionnaire, which looks at demographics, services, infrastructure, governance, and use of communal assets, and as well as prices. Okay, so zooming into the livestock module within in the household economy, and specifically in the LSMS type surveys, we try to integrate information on livestock with other aspects of the household economy, which of course allows decision makers to design and implement investments to maximize the contribution of livestock to poverty reduction and other social economic objectives. So building on experiences from Niger, Uganda, and Tanzania, which are 3 countries that have an important and significant livestock component, and with the objective of increasing the quantity and quality of livestock data available for decision makers, the World Bank and FAO joined forces with the National Statistical Offices and ILRI and AU EBRAR, and we built what we call a livestock module template on household surveys. So there was this interactive moment where we got feedback from the different NSOs as well as the other organizations on how we could improve the way in which we are collecting livestock data. So specific livestock modules within the LSMS survey as well as standalone livestock modules were then tested in Niger, in Tanzania, and in Uganda. So we integrated these modules in our LSMS survey and we tested them to see if they were effectively capturing important aspects. 2 very critical aspects were milk production and egg production, which as most data users and even can confirm are challenging when collecting this information and analyzing it. So what came out of it is, of course, we developed 3 formats of proposed modules. So we have a short module, a standard, and an extended module of livestock that can be standalone, but can also be integrated in any other For example, a lot of countries have integrated them in their annual agricultural surveys to collect livestock data. So the short module, of course, has the basic questions, the important questions that need to be there. Then the standard module is the one that is for countries or contexts that have a relevant component of livestock, but also have other components in the agricultural sector. So we try to include it so that, but it's not so long. Then we have the extended module that is quite intense. It's very detailed. So it's mainly for countries that have a prevalent component of livestock in the agricultural sector. For example, Niger and I think Ethiopia also implemented the extended module. And again, these modules are proposed to countries, and they tailor them. So they don't have to take the entire module. In fact, in a lot of countries, they would take the standard module and then they would add in maybe some questions from the extended module, or they'll take the short module and then they would incorporate some questions. So it has to be demand driven, and it's tailored to each specific context. Together with the modules, we also wrote a guidebook, and I've brought some copies, and please feel free to pick one at the table at the end. So we developed some guidelines on how you can measure the role of livestock in the household economy. It's also, you can also download it on our website. So if you Google livestock guideline, or if you Google the title, it will come out. And as I said, the guidelines are a collaborative work with FAO. So two of us are co-authors from the bank, and then we have a co-author from FAO. And then we have also two colleagues who are working in the National Statistical Office. We've been collecting data with them from the Tanzania National Bureau of Statistics and the Ugandan National Bureau of Statistics. So the livestock guidelines or guidebook documents the different lessons learned through the experiences with Niger, Tanzania, and Uganda on surveys, and they also provide a wider livestock community of practice with a tested survey instrument for integration into future surveys. So the guidelines present a module template. So at the end of the guidelines, we have actually put in the module template, but on the website, you can download the Excel version of the template for effectively including livestock into a multi-topic and agricultural household survey in low and middle income countries. It is, of course, a practical tool for survey practitioners, mainly bureaus of statistics, ministries responsible for livestock, and non-governmental and civil societies. But also, we've come to realize that a lot of people who are using the data also look at the guidelines, because it also gives you the rationale why some of the data is collected. Because in the guidelines, we also explain we are collecting this data, but it can be used for calculating this, so we also give indications of the rationale behind why some of this data is collected. So it also, as I said, it includes a short, standard, and what we call an extended or an expanded version of a questionnaire, which provides a different different in the level, the differences in the level of details that can be gauged from each other, and it has four main common objectives. One is to generate basic statistics of key livestock related variables such as livestock ownership and access to animal health services, but it also helps to measure the value of household livestock, which is an important economic asset for most households, and it also measures the cash and in-kind income from livestock. And finally, it also another objective is to characterize households, livestock husbandry and production practices. So having information on production as well as inputs and associated values allows one to compute, or the computation of measures of income from livestock, enabling the quantification, of course, of the importance and the role of livestock in the household economy, as well as examining how different socioeconomic profiles engage in this particular sector. So there are three main, it's not very clear, but you can see that there are three main domains we look at. So we look at the livestock ownership, and then there's inputs and husbandry practices, and then there's outputs. So in each of these, we have the sections, and then we have the different remarks and recommendations. One of the big, just to give you an example, one of the big change or contribution we got for the LSMs is the way in which we collect data, for example, for big and small ruminants compared to the way we collect data, for example, poultry. So we changed the recall period for things like poultry to 3 months compared to a 12-month recall period, because when you'd ask farmers on poultry on a 12-month recall period, the data that was coming in was not capturing their production. So there was we got a lot of input from the Ministries of Agriculture through the National Statistical Offices. Oh, I think that's it. Yeah, so very quickly in the section, so under ownership, we focus, of course, on the number of animals and the changes in stocks over the past 3 months and the past 12 months. And then under inputs and husbandry practices, we have breeding practices, feeding, watering, animal health, housing, and of course labor, which again remains a huge challenge also for the livestock sector. Also because we find that most labor per se is difficult, but you find that it's difficult to quantify the amount of labor each, for example, household member uses for each animal, because most times they would maybe feed several animals together or they'd water them together. So it's very difficult to capture that information. So those are still some of the challenges we are working on. And I think this platform is very important for us data producers or collectors, because we are very much interested in getting feedback from people who are using the data. We get a lot of feedback from our national statistical offices, but we are also keen to get feedback, critiques, or things you think we could collect better, or we are missing in the way in which we are collecting data for those who have used the LSMS data. So please feel free to share here, or if you see me somewhere, just come and attack me. And I'm here on behalf of the LSMS team, and I'm very, very happy to collect any inputs, any feedback from this platform. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Harriet. So you're looking for feedback, and I think you're going to get some immediate feedback in the next presentation. I think we'll hold the questions until we've had both presentations. So now Mark van Wijk of ILRI is going to present some experiences with using LSMS data.
Good. So I will talk about actually household surveys in general, but also, of course, about the LSMS ISO data. Let me first just mention the names of the PhD students who have done most of the hard work. So if I say we, then that normally means the data work. That's Jim Hammonds, Janneke Wiever, and Simon Chaval, and Romain Frela. So what do we try to do? Just a brief introduction is just find structure basically in smallholder farming systems with a special focus on sub-Saharan Africa. We want to try to understand systems functioning and quantify relationships between agriculture and welfare. And we have a special focus on food security. And not surprisingly, given this session, we use farm household characterization data as our workhorse. So in the first exercise, we started to bring together all kinds of household survey data sets from different projects, from different institutes, and we tried to define a common indicator of food security. That was rather a painful exercise to actually define such a common indicator. And basically, we had to settle for a rather simple, some would say simplistic indicator. And that indicator takes into account livestock products, off-farm income, cash crops and food crops. What's being sold goes into a box that's called cash available. What's being consumed goes into a kilocalorie indicator, food available. And we took the rather brave step of turning all the cash available into kilocalories by buying the staple crop. That's of course a huge assumption that doesn't happen in reality, but at least it gives us insight in the potential of farm households to generate enough energy to feed the family. And that total energy is then compared to the household size and composition. So we extract from the data we have available, the service we have available, information about production, crop and livestock, productive resources, household level information, and basic management information. Start explaining the patterns we see. So how does that look like? We get graphs like this. It looks pretty horrible, but it's actually containing a lot of information. So on the x-axis, we have here for an application in Lushoto, 200 individual households, and we've ordered them along the score of that potential food availability indicator. And the red dotted line is the 1:1 ratio. So actually, with all the activities that the household is doing, they're possible to generate enough energy to feed themselves. And in the different colors, you see the different activities. So green is consumption of crops, blue is sales, we have pinkish the cash crops, in red is consumption of livestock products, orangey is sales, and in black it's off-farm income. And so you see within one population enormous variation in the score, the indicator score, and you see along an increase in that score also a complete shift in the strategy that the household is following. And you see also a very worrying quantification, and that's on the left, because those households are way, way below the red dotted line. And that's an indication that we're dealing with bad data quality. Yeah? Basically, to be so low, that's impossible if you try to capture all the activities. And to put it a bit morbid, these households are supposed to be dead. But that's not the case. They're running around. So we're missing information. There's under-reporting going on. Yeah? And I will come back to that because we use it actually to assess the data quality we are encountering in different survey instruments. So this we applied across the whole data set. So for each individual household, in this case 13,000, we could quantify all of that. And in the bottom, we then start looking at what different types of households are doing. Yeah? So 3 bar graphs, basically on the left, severely food insecure, roughly food secure, and food secure. And again, in the different colors, the different activities and the role that livestock is playing in terms of consumption and in terms of sales. And its relative importance. And you see between those groups, there's clear differences in strategies that the households follow. So this we started also applying to the LSMs ISA data, expanding the database even further. And here I give an example of Uganda, where we had about 2,000 households. The data available. This is work led by Jan Wiegern. Again, we can quantify that indicator across the board and look at what different household types are doing. And also start looking at it in from a spatial perspective. So what is happening with different household groups in different regions in the country? What are they doing in terms of crops? What is livestock doing, etc., etc. And we can go even also to the individual crops and individual livestock species. What is happening where for which type of household? Which again gives us also an entry point to do all kinds of impact assessments, extended impact assessments, and intervention analysis. And if you really want to go wild, you can actually also make continuous maps, and again map where what is happening for which type of households. And so we have been using all of these existing data resources, and we said, okay, with relatively simple indicators, we can actually already derive a lot of information. However, absolutely no standardization or harmonization present. Data use, already mentioned before today, in existing surveys is extremely inefficient, which has consequences for data quality. Yeah? Long surveys lead to bad data quality. So that sort of drove us to develop our own survey tool, which is called Rhomis, which takes as a starting point that indicator we've just developed and quantified. So we have always comparable information with this survey compared to the analysis we've done, a consistent database. But we've built a consistent structure, a framework around that indicator. Yeah? So it's drivers and strategies, household characteristics, livelihood strategies, agricultural system information, series of performance indicators, looking at performance from an economic perspective, an agricultural perspective, and then a series of indicators that look at welfare, with a special focus on food security. So that we can also cross-check different indicators, what do they tell us about the welfare situation. And the arrow basically gives the direction or the way we typically analyze all of the information. So that's what we call the core of Rhomis. It's the information that's always collected in all of the applications. But below, we can also then, for different projects, for different partners, add specific modules and add specific questions or indicators so that the survey tool becomes fit for purpose. And by now, we have built up quite a library of additional modules that basically can be used in a plug-and-play type of way. So this, we started this mid-2015, and now together with a whole range of partners, we have already a large amount of data, lots of applications where we always collect also the basic livestock information. So these are NGOs, these are research organizations, CG institutes, etc. in projects focused on non-timber forest products, crop diversification, conservation agriculture, whatever. But always, they also collect the key information that we want in terms of livestock characterization, livestock production, etc., etc. Yeah? So it really is a harmonized database across all of these applications. And actually, with the applications that are currently going on, we're at 26,000 in households surveyed in 30 countries. So it's really sort of exploding way beyond anything we imagined. And so, like I said, we always collect that key livestock information as well. We always get the question, why didn't you use LSMS ISA? Why did you develop your own survey tool? Well, they serve different purposes, of course. Yeah? LSMS ISA is very comprehensive. You could call a consensus tool, or you bring experts together. In Rhomis, it's really targeted. And the core takes about 30-40 minutes per household to get that information. So it's really targeted, specific, relatively speedy. But of course, to be able to achieve that speed, you have to make very difficult decisions. And not everybody's happy with the type of decisions we have taken. Yeah? So it's certainly not a consensus tool. And what we typically also run into is that we encounter in the different applications different sampling strategies. Whereas LSMS, of course, is imposed, so that's a representative type of sampling. We don't have that. And so in principle, we're talking really about complementary approaches. The core information we have extracted from LSMS ISA and the core information that's collected in Rhomis is similar, so we can combine those data sets. But in Rhomis, we have also the extra information that we would like to have. So this allows us the whole series of multi-scale analysis. A bit about data quality. So I showed that graph before, looking at that gap below the red line. When it's really unrealistic, statistically big, that gap. But also on the consumption side, when you start adding everything together that people are reporting that they eat, you also encounter quite a bit of obesity if we trust data. Yeah? So we have on the left side sort of an underestimation, underreporting, and in the middle column is overreporting. And that we can quantify in terms of when we look at percentages of really data that we should reject based on combining this type of information. When you then look at LSMS ISA, you get to a whopping 40% in some of the applications where we had to reject the data collected, which is a bit worrying, I think. So Impact Light, that's sort of a standard 3 to 4 hour household survey. We got to 15 to 30% rejection rates. And in Rhomis, we could bring that down to 10 to 20%. Still substantial. And it's, of course, not a fair comparison, because Rhomis is really targeted towards collecting this type of information. But it shows that if you have a target tool, you do get better data quality. So we've done a lot of site-specific analysis using Rhomis data, but we're really interested in doing a cross-site analysis. Yeah? To look for general patterns and drivers of general patterns of those pathways towards food security. One part of our data set is really building up, a panel type of data, where we go back over time to the same household and see what's happening. So this is a fun river diagram. It shows in red the food insecure households, in the middle sort of the medium households, and in green the households above the poverty line, and how did they change over a 4-year period from 2012 to 2016. And these were 4 sites in East Africa, well connected to markets of farm opportunities. But you see then an enormous variation, enormous dynamicness in that system of households getting access to off-farm income, but also a substantial part of households losing access to off-farm income. And what we see in these data, that off-farm income and investment in intensification really goes hand in hand. And on the right-hand side, sort of a cross-check whether the classes we have defined, the trajectory classes, make sense in terms of other welfare indicators. Other analysis, I don't think I have the time to go in a lot of detail, probably already over time. But anyway, we look at dietary diversity and pathways towards dietary diversity. So on the right, you see the overall diversity score and the different food groups that make that diversity score. And then on the left, you see what's coming actually from the farm, which food groups are consumed from the farm, and in the middle, what farmers are purchasing. And then different household or farm types. So the upper one is specialized cropping. There's only few food items really coming from the farm, and most is purchased. On the left, on the bottom side, then is actually diverse cropping and livestock. And the white in the farm source one is milk, which is directly consumed if cattle is present. And this we try to analyze. We also translate that in micronutrient gaps, but I'm not going to detail there. Another key indicator we're looking at is gender, female control over decision making over sales, and decision making over consumption. And typically with the crops, we see a very stark contrast between what women are allowed to say over consumption in blue versus over sales, but you also see strong differences between crops. And the same we did for livestock, where you typically see much more even decision power or decision control over produce, except for livestock. That's really a men's thing. So we do a lot of cross-site analysis where we bring really the community of practice of people using Rhomis together. So it's really always joint outputs. And the key thing we're currently working on is to bring out the first batch of data, make that publicly available through a data science publication, and really try to do that on an annual basis. So every year what's being collected, we will make publicly available together with all the analysis scripts and the indicator calculations. And so that all brings us a giant, large, integral type of database where we can do this type of food security and poverty analysis. That's what I want to tell you. Thank you for your attention.
Good. Thanks, Mark. Harriet, do you want to come back up and we'll take a few questions? Grab a seat. Sit in the hot seat. So questions on LSMS, Rhomis, data collection. Tim.
Thanks. Mark, with your, it's interesting seeing that Tanzanian graph again that I remember from the good old days of the humid tropics. But I hadn't realized you'd been analyzing that to work out which of the data were unreliable. But a question I have is just, if you're just identifying unreliable data points by virtue of the fact that they're coming up with implausible results, I mean, the same level of unreliability might be in the middle of that data set, but they're just not flagged by the method that you're using to identify it. So I mean, it could be much more than 40% that's unreliable. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah, so at least we can identify really the outliers. Where I think if you start combining and putting together the observations, then they don't really make sense. Yeah, so something's really going wrong. So there's for sure a systematic underreporting going on, very likely related to off-farm income, because farmers are very reluctant to give reliable information there. But we also know that in certain circumstances, they will underreport yield. And so, of course, we also looked at the individual yield values and productivities per hectare and productivities per animal. But those are more difficult to say, okay, this is really unreliable, yes or no. And so it's only on basis on that gap or the overestimation that we could have a reliable basis to say, okay, this is not okay.
There's no other.
But can you identify other characteristics of those households that may indicate that they're unreliable that you could then apply to other ones that aren't flagged as such by those metrics?
I think that's tricky. And so we have the individual yield observations. We know what they report in terms of off-farm income, and we see the combined consequences of those values. But to really say that others are also unreliable, I'm not sure. We haven't done that
John Claxton.
Hi. So, Harriet, thanks very much for the update. I think, as I mentioned briefly yesterday, they found in Tanzania, we found really helpful the LSMS data. It's been really good. But given that they've also collected a whole pile of other additional data, my colleagues have some sort of suggestions about potential ways of improving the LSMS to make it more relevant. So you mentioned about getting in touch. I mean, is that the best way to do it? Are there any sort of ways of looking at maybe updating and amending data as time goes by?
Okay, so I think for Tanzania, it's we're going to the field. Hopefully, if everything goes well in January. So there is still space for let's say including suggestions. So normally the way it works, we normally we have an LSMS email, and then we have country people who are focus points for specific countries. So normally if you can either send, if you send an email to me for maybe Mali database, I can forward it to the person who coordinates, and it depends on the kind of question or the kind of suggestion. So in this case, yeah, it would be excellent if you could share with us your insights, and we can either incorporate them in the. So we have the extended panel that is going to go to the field on hopefully in January, and then we have the full panel that will go to the field in the course of the year. So in either cases, we are open to then including. Mind you, once we receive comments, we have to normally share them with the national statistical offices, and at the end of the day, they are the ones who also decide what goes in, because it also the demand also has to come from the specific country.
Okay, Hannah.
Thanks. Kind of a provocative question, maybe, but not really. But how appropriate do you think are household surveys for capturing some of these livestock measures? I guess is my question. Based on some of the questions, the issues that you raised, Harriet, and I'm just curious if the one is around like whether annual household surveys are the appropriate tool to capture some of this information that are required, and then also if the LSMS team have any methodological research programs going on right now around alternative ways to capture some of this information. Like I know that others in your group have looked into other ways of capturing like crop yield, right? Or varietal information for crops. And so are there any current efforts around improving methods to capture some of these livestock measures?
Okay, so Hannah, so on the first question on whether or not LSMS or household surveys are the best way to capture livestock, I think it just depends on the level of detail, and in many countries, like I think if I'm not wrong, right now in Ethiopia, the LSMS survey is ongoing in parallel with the agricultural annual survey. So we also do support countries, giving them technical support where needed for them to also do their annual agricultural surveys. Our surveys are multi-topic, so it's difficult, especially in the African context when you're talking of agriculture, not to include livestock, because then it leads to the other situation where you're not capturing some of the activities, or in terms of time use, or in terms of contribution to their assets, or there is a series of other welfare-related activities. So I think it needs to be there. So the level of detail again is what drove us to developing three levels of modules, where you say, okay, if I go into a country where livestock is predominant over crop, then we think about implementing or we propose to them to implement an extended version of the questionnaire. Or in some cases, in the annual agricultural surveys, they've actually taken up from the extended module. So mind you, what we are proposing in terms of also in our guidelines is not only for LSMS surveys. It can be for anyone who wants to do a livestock survey and pick questions or sections from these modules and modify them and adapt them to the specific context. So it's just saying, based on our experience in these countries in collecting data, this is what we are proposing. Again, it's proposed within a household multi-topic survey and not just a livestock survey. So that's maybe the other challenge. So on methodological work, that's a good point. So we've done, so far there's a lot that's going on crop and on variety identification. I was also working with some colleagues in Uganda on continuous crops such as bananas, how to measure variety identification. On livestock, there isn't, at least to my knowledge, for this fiscal year, any particular methodological work. One thing we're doing at the ag level, which also then captures livestock, is we're doing some experiments on measuring labor productivity and looking at gender differences using a different, instead of using the kind of stuff, we're trying to see if we had a more what we call a high frequency survey, you can capture that more, because we know that labor changes pretty given the different moments within the year, especially in African settings. So even during the planting phase, the way in which the household uses own labor or hires labor can change. So I'm currently heading this experiment. We're doing it in Nigeria, and what we're doing is we've taken a subsample of our own LSMS survey. So then we can compare the data we collect when they just report post-planting and post-harvest compared to what they report in a high-frequency survey to see if we are better capturing labor, because labor is one of the most, we all know, complex component. The other thing that we were thinking that we're still working on is how to measure milk and egg production, which is also one of the biggest challenges. And the National Statistical Offices have also, told us, and a lot of data users find it very difficult to use the current self-reported egg and milk production because of the way in which we are collecting the data. So there's, and can I say, unfortunately, at the moment, I cannot say that we have specific methodological work, but that's something me and my colleague have been pushing for. So maybe it could be something that we could gain from.
Good. We maybe have two more, Neil and then Karen.
Yeah, thanks. This is a point for Mark, and one that we picked up on the cattle mark talk. And it just seemed quite striking that the key determining factor of smallholder welfare is off-farm income, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? And it's just a question, is this well known in the community? It's kind of new to me, and it's kind of striking as well. So
I cannot really say about the community. It's well known to me, because we see it again and again, even in remote areas, remittances. There's always some sort of family member working in the city, seasonal labor. We see that really in these smallholder systems is a key driver. We also have specific questions of where do they see where the children should go, where's the future of the children. It's almost always getting to school and getting them out of farming. But that drive towards getting out of farming is really strong in these kind of small systems, where you typically look at farm sizes up to 2 hectares, very small livestock holdings. It is really difficult to see what the future of those systems are if you just focus on farm activity.
Yeah, a bit of a follow-up to that. The data I've seen in South America, where families have moved into the cities and they're doing remittances, people are investing in livestock. So they're using livestock as a bank, or appears to be, which probably isn't sustainable because those animals are going to be eating things that they shouldn't be doing, and probably not very productive. But I think that's capturing that investment issue is probably quite important in that kind of structure as well.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, just reflecting on John's point about having some comments to make on LSMS, and I know there's others in the room who use LSMS quite extensively, and also your comment on egg production and milk production. I think it's a real opportunity for this community to get our thoughts together in this area, and we could have a workshop, or we could try and collect our thoughts on different challenges around LSMS and feed them back in a constructive manner to World Bank. So I think that's one thing that we will be picking up in the discussion after this, the working group discussion.
Good. Okay. There's a lot of enthusiasm for more questions. What's the mood in the room? Do we allow more questions? Yeah. Okay. Tim, and then Orsi, and then we finish.
Another question for Mark. From your those graphs you showed about the male and female control over different assets. So with the crops, there was quite clear male dominance in both sale and consumption, wasn't there? But in the livestock, it was much more equal. And the question is that actual evidence, or getting towards evidence, that keeping livestock is more equitable in terms of gender, or is that too far a leap?
That I would say is too far a leap. What we also see is that the female control score goes down if production goes up. And so if milk production goes up and they start selling it through formal markets, then the men take over again. And so it's in the balance there. You cannot say livestock is more equal than crops.
Orsi?
Okay. I'd have a comment and a question. I'd go back to Hannah's question, because we've been working with the LSMS data, and we were exactly using it to assess how livestock keeping contributes to certain farmers and livelihood. And so one thing we think it's a very valuable data source because of the size and method of sampling. However, of course, it's not a livestock questionnaire. So when they did the sample design, livestock distribution has not been taken into account. So of course, you cannot use it as a census. We did, however, compare actually the where census data was available, the distribution of animal population from the survey and the distribution from the census. And in some countries, it's pretty close. In others, it's less. But I think what was very valuable was really looking at the multi-topic content and seeing how, because that's the only way you can really assess livelihoods, because you could really see the other income sources, other activities that the households are doing. And that's fantastic. And of course, this differs hugely by production system. So for pastoral systems or commercial systems, there's not a good representation. However, mixed crop livestock systems, agro-pastoral systems, and urban peri-urban systems are very well represented. We had really good samples, and we got a lot of interesting information out of it on production practices, on other activities in the household. So I think it's definitely a very valuable data source for this use. You just have to really take these limitations into account and put it into context. And my question would be about the income calculation in off-farm and off-farm income and livestock income in Mark's presentation, because so you basically used it as a criteria, turning the disposable income of the household into a food availability indicator. And so I worked on building a database using household surveys, and we calculated disposable income. And across, we've looked at 50, 60 surveys, and it's off-farm income and livestock income were typically categories where you always had a bunch of negative incomes, because the investments and savings are not captured within the same time frame. So I was just wondering, how did you address this, especially since you were using it as a criteria to qualify data as not good quality?
No, so the indicator is really a potential supply indicator. So it says something about the potential.
Right.
And we've happily ignored all the items you just mentioned.
Okay, but because yeah, I think it's very difficult, because some purchases in livestock or in the off-farm family enterprises especially happen from savings that are not captured within the survey. So I think we had huge share of households in these categories with negative incomes, and yeah, I think
But yeah, we have seen that in many surveys as well, and that's really the cost information is simply not okay. When you look at the way costs are reported and the way they are captured in such a one-off survey, I don't think that's reliable. We have tried that before ourselves as well. You run into 50–60% of the households running negative.
Yeah.
Even if you just look at the crop activities, both the livestock activities. So that information, and that's actually one of the key reasons why we do not capture labor nor costs in Rhomis, because the information is when you look at it, if you do the balance calculation, it again doesn't make sense. You cannot have 60–70% of the households running negative in terms of returns. Yeah, so to ask such questions in a household survey where you knock on a door and you ask all kinds of questions in terms of that type of information, which is so variable throughout the year and is very much linked to specific activities that happen only once or twice a year, these type of household surveys are not fit to do.
Okay. Last comment from Harriet, and then we wind up this session. You're going to ask a question, or? Okay. Yeah.
No, mine was just to link to that. I think labor productivity, I mean, not only for livestock, but I think capturing labor in agricultural surveys, in household surveys, in Africa, in the African context, is complex for different reasons. So again, as I said, we at the moment we strive. One of the LSMS objectives is to strive to improve the way in which we are collecting data, and hopefully by next year we've done this experiment in Nigeria, and we'll do it also in Ethiopia to try and using high frequency surveys to see if you can better capture labor information in more shorter spans and throughout maybe the agricultural season to see if we're better capturing agricultural labor productivity. Because as much as it's easy to not include it, it's still an important component in the way in which, in time use, and especially we are observing, especially now we're looking at some of the data that's coming in for Nigeria, there are a lot of also gender differences in the way in which agriculture, labor productivity takes place in this context.
Great. Okay. Well, we're going to come back to LSMS after coffee in the working group. So those who are particularly interested in LSMS, Rhomis surveys in general, there's an opportunity after coffee to gather in a group around that. Which brings me nicely on to talking about the post-coffee. Well, let's say thank you all, first of all, to Mark and Harriet. The last item for the day is some working groups, which will convene after coffee. These are the ones we're proposing, open